For over 200 years, the wealthiest people in Europe were certain this fruit could kill you. They called it the poison apple. And here's the strange part. They weren't entirely wrong. People really did get sick. People really did die. But the killer at the table was never the tomato. Today, the tomato is everywhere. Pizza, pasta, ketchup. But for 2 centuries, it sat on the edge of the dinner table, feared, mistrusted, and accused of murder. So how did the world's most beloved fruit become its most feared one? Let's dig up the real story, because almost everything you've heard about it is only half true. Our story starts far from Italy, high in the Andes of South America. The wild tomato was once no bigger than a marble. It was the Aztecs who tamed it, grew it, and gave it a name, something close to tomatal. Then in the 1500s, Spanish ships carried it across the ocean, along with gold, silver, and 100 other curiosities from the New World. The tomato arrived in Europe as an exotic stranger, and Europe did not know what to make of it. It was beautiful. It was bright red. And to the European eye, that was exactly the problem. The Italians, charmed, called it pomidoro, the golden apple. The French went further, naming it pomme d'amour, the love apple, and whispering that it was an aphrodisiac, a beautiful, foreign, possibly seductive fruit. In 16th century Europe, that was not a recommendation. It was a warning. Beautiful, foreign, and possibly an aphrodisiac? To a nervous European, that wasn't a fruit. That was trouble with seeds in it. Here's the first thing working against our fruit. Its family. The tomato belongs to a group of plants called the nightshades, and some of its closest cousins are genuinely deadly. Like belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade, a plant that could stop your heart. To a cautious 16th century botanist, the logic was simple. If it looks like the poisonous family and grows like the poisonous family, maybe don't put it in your mouth. They weren't being foolish. They were guessing, and they guessed wrong. But this was only the beginning of the tomato's bad reputation. And now it gets weird. The tomato's scientific name is Lycopersicum, which translates to wolf peach. Say it out loud, Lycopersicum. Notice how close that sounds to lycanthropy. The word for turning into a werewolf? That's not a coincidence anyone in the 1500s missed, because this was the height of the witch hunts. Inquisitors were obsessed with the so-called flying ointment, a magical salve witches supposedly rubbed on their broomsticks to fly or to transform into wolves. And according to a record kept by the Pope's own physician in 1545, the key ingredients of that ointment were nightshade, henbane, and mandrake, 3 of the tomato's closest botanical relatives. So picture it, a strange red fruit from a family of witches' poisons with a name that whispers werewolf. The tomato never stood a chance. And here's the kicker. That creepy name was a mistake. Wolf peach came from an ancient Greek text describing some poisonous plant nobody could ever actually identify. Centuries later, botanists pinned that mystery name onto the tomato almost by accident, so the fruit was branded a wolf's poison, by a clerical error. The tomato wasn't just unlucky, it was framed. 200 years of fear, all kicked off by a guy who couldn't read his Greek properly. Somewhere, a tomato is still waiting for an apology. Every good story needs a villain. Ours is an Englishman named John Gerard, a barber surgeon who in 1597 published one of the most influential plant books of his time. When Gerard got to the tomato, he didn't hold back. He called it corrupt, with a smell that was rank and stinking. Here's the irony. Gerard actually knew that people in Spain and Italy were eating tomatoes just fine. He wrote it down himself, but he declared it poison anyway. And here's the part that's almost too good. Large chunks of Gerard's famous book were quietly copied from other authors. So one of the most influential verdicts in food history. The man who condemned the tomato across the English-speaking world may have been passing along second-hand opinions he didn't even fully check. Honestly, the tomato deserved a better lawyer, and because his book was so widely copied, much of it honestly lifted from other authors, his verdict stuck. For generations in England and across its American colonies, the tomato was guilty. The cruelest twist? Gerard was half right. The leaves and the stem of the tomato plant are mildly toxic. But the fruit, the part we actually eat, was innocent all along. But not everyone was so afraid. While the English recoiled, Southern Europe was quietly falling in love. In sun-soaked Italy and Spain, cooks were already slicing tomatoes, cooking them down with salt, pepper, and oil. By the late 1500s, recipes in the Spanish style were spreading across the Mediterranean. So why the difference? Part of it was simple weather and medical superstition. The personal physician to King James I argued that tomatoes might cool the body in hot places like Spain. But England, he said, was already cold and damp enough. Thank you very much. It sounds absurd today, but this was real medical theory. Food was thought to balance the body's heat and cold, and a cooling fruit in a cold, wet country was practically a prescription for illness. In other words, the tomato wasn't just feared. In the north, it was considered the wrong food for the wrong climate. Italy ate. England stared. One nation invented marinara. The other grew tomatoes purely to look at them. History was watching, and history was judging. Same fruit, two completely different fates. Now, here's the explanation you've probably heard. The story goes like this. Rich Europeans ate off pewter plates, which were loaded with lead. The tomato is acidic, so it leached the lead out of the plate. The aristocrats got lead poisoning and blamed the fruit. It's a great story. It's in countless videos and articles. There's just one problem. Scientists say it doesn't really hold up. According to a chemist at McGill University, the amount of lead a tomato could actually pull from a plate during one meal would be tiny. Nowhere near enough to make you sick, let alone kill you. If wealthy Europeans were getting lead poisoning, the real sources were far more likely things like lead water pipes or cider pressed through lead equipment. So the famous poison plate theory? It turns out to be another myth. A tidy explanation we've been repeating because it sounds satisfying. The truth is messier. The tomato was condemned by a pileup of bad luck, its scary family, its eerie name, a stubborn book, and a fear that simply outlived the facts. So who saved the tomato? Not the aristocrats. The poor did. Peasants in Italy couldn't afford fancy plates or fancy fears. They just grew tomatoes, ate them, and turned them into the sauces and stews we'd now recognize in an instant. And then came the moment that changed everything. Pizza. In the 1880s, in the city of Naples, the tomato found its destiny on a flatbread. And from there, it conquered the world. The fruit once called poison became the beating red heart of one of the most beloved foods on earth. There's a famous story that in 1820, a New Jersey colonel named Robert Johnson climbed the courthouse steps and ate a raw tomato in front of a stunned crowd, just to prove it wouldn't kill him. He stood there, he waited, and he lived. It's a perfect ending. The brave man, the doubting crowd, the vindicated fruit. There's just one catch. Historians can't find any real evidence it actually happened. The story was probably invented decades later and polished with every retelling, which, when you think about it, is the most fitting ending of all. The tomato's entire history is a story about how a good story, true or not, can outlive the facts for centuries. So the next time you pour a little tomato sauce, remember the 200 years it spent on trial for a crime it never committed. What other everyday food do you think has a secret history like this? Tell me in the comments. I might make it the next episode. And if you'd like more forgotten food stories, you know what to do.